What if the fear that has followed you your entire life is not evidence of danger, but proof that you have never been taught how to govern your own mind? And what if every prayer for protection has failed not because it went unanswered, but because you never assumed the inner position required to receive it? Most people believe fear is an emotion. That belief alone keeps them enslaved. Fear is not an emotion in the way joy or sadness is an emotion. Fear is a mental posture. It is a decision the mind makes, often unconsciously, about who holds authority. When fear dominates, authority is surrendered to circumstance, to chance, to other people, to imagined futures, and to forces the individual believes are greater than themselves. Napoleon Hill spent his life dismantling this illusion, and Psalm 91, when stripped of ritual and sentimentality, exposes the same truth with ruthless clarity. Protection is not given to those who beg for it, but to those who dwell in the consciousness of dominion. To dwell is not to visit. To dwell is to live mentally in one place so consistently that it becomes identity. Most people visit courage in moments of inspiration, then return to fear when reality applies pressure. They visit faith when circumstances collapse, then retreat to doubt when uncertainty appears. They visit discipline when motivation is high, then abandon it when comfort calls. The law does not respond to visits, it responds to residence. Hill understood this, and Psalm 91 begins with this exact distinction, because without it, nothing else works. The secret place spoken of is not mystical geography. It is psychological positioning. It is the internal location occupied by a person who has made a definite decision about who governs their thoughts. This is why fearless living is rare. It demands responsibility most people are unwilling to accept. Responsibility is heavier than fear. Fear allows excuses. Responsibility removes them. Hill taught that definiteness of purpose is the starting point of all achievement. Without it, the mind drifts. Drift is the natural enemy of fearlessness. A drifting mind absorbs suggestion without resistance. It accepts fear narratives from media, culture, family history, and personal trauma as facts rather than opinions. Psalm 91 is written to interrupt drift. Its tone is not tentative. It does not ask, it declares. Declaration is psychological force. It interrupts uncertainty and replaces it with assumption. Assumption is the doorway to belief. Belief, as Hill defined it, is not intellectual agreement. It is emotional acceptance. A person may say they believe in protection while emotionally expecting harm. The law responds to expectation, not vocabulary. This is why so many people pray yet remain terrified. Their words ask for safety while their imagination rehearses disaster. The subconscious obeys the rehearsal, not the request. Fear is fed through imagination. Hill warned repeatedly that uncontrolled imagination is the most destructive force available to the human mind. It creates vivid futures that have not happened and reacts to them as though they are real. The body does not know the difference. Anxiety is the physical response to imagined threat. Psalm 91 counters this by offering alternative imagery, not to comfort, but to dominate the inner narrative. When imagery of refuge, authority, and safety becomes habitual, the nervous system recalibrates. Calm is not an accident. It is conditioned. Burning desire is the fuel required to maintain this conditioning. Fearlessness is not sustained by logic. It is sustained by obsession. The desire to live internally ungoverned must be stronger than the comfort of surrender. Hill emphasized that weak desire produces weak results. A person who wants peace but is unwilling to discipline their thoughts will always lose to fear. Desire must burn hot enough to override habit. Habit is the silent architect of destiny. Fear persists not because it is justified, but because it is familiar. The mind returns to what it knows under stress. This is why momentary inspiration collapses under pressure. Faith that has not been habituated evaporates when challenged. Psalm 91 assumes repetition. It assumes dwelling. It assumes practice. It is not a charm, it is a pattern. Self-discipline is the structure that allows faith to survive contradiction. Without discipline, belief becomes emotional and therefore unstable. Hill made it clear that self-discipline governs thought selection first, behavior second. Fearless individuals do not wait for feelings to change. They command behavior until feelings follow. They reject fear, base thoughts not because danger is impossible, but because surrender is unacceptable. Fear mastery does not mean fear absence. It means fear subordination. Fear is information, not instruction. Most people reverse this. They allow fear to issue commands, then justify obedience by calling it realism. Hill dismantled this lie by showing that every great achievement was accomplished in the presence of fear, not the absence of it. Psalm 91 does not promise a world without threat. It promises a mind that refuses to bow to it. Faith, in its functional form, is self-trust aligned with universal law. It is the certainty that inner alignment produces outer stability over time. This is why patience is inseparable from fearlessness. Impatience creates anxiety. Anxiety feeds fear. Hill emphasized persistence because persistence outlasts emotional fluctuation. The person who persists in belief long enough forces reality to reorganize. Decision is the moment fear loses its strongest weapon. Fear thrives in indecision because indecision suspends authority. When no decision is made, Psalm 91 speaks from a place of decision already reached. There is no debate in its tone. Debate weakens belief. Decision crystallizes it. Invisible mental forces are always at work. Whether one calls them law, subconscious conditioning, or spiritual principle is irrelevant. They operate impersonally. They reward alignment and punish contradiction. Hill's greatest warning was that ignorance of these laws does not grant immunity from their effects. Fearful thinking produces fearful outcomes not as punishment, but as consequence. Most people live reactively because they have never been taught proactive mental governance. They wait for circumstances to determine their internal state. Psalm 91 reverses this order. It assumes inner authority first, outer response second. This reversal is the essence of fearless living. To live without fear is not to live without risk. It is to live without submission. Submission is the true enemy. Submission to imagined futures. Submission to inherited beliefs. Submission to collective panic. Hill devoted his life to proving that the individual who controls their inner world eventually controls their outer conditions, even when the path is long and the resistance fierce. Fearless living is not dramatic. It is quiet. It is composed. It is internally anchored. It does not require validation. It does not seek permission. It does not announce itself. It simply refuses to surrender the mind. Psalm 91 is not a promise made to the passive. It is an agreement entered by the disciplined. It assumes mental rigor, emotional control, and unwavering faith. Without these, its words are poetry. With them, they are law. This is where the separation begins. Not between believers and non-believers, but between those willing to accept total responsibility for their inner state and those who prefer the comfort of blame. Fearlessness demands accountability, and accountability is the price most people are unwilling to pay. The moment a person accepts that fear is not imposed but permitted, something uncomfortable happens inside them. Excuses begin to collapse. Excuses are psychological shelters. They protect the ego from responsibility, but they also imprison the will. Napoleon Hill knew that the average mind would rather cling to a comforting explanation than confront an empowering truth. It is easier to believe that fear comes from the world than to admit it is maintained by habit. Yet fearless living begins precisely where excuses end, because power cannot coexist with denial. The mind is not neutral territory. It is a battleground governed by laws that operate with or without consent. Every thought repeated with emotion seeks dominance. Every image rehearsed claims territory. Every belief accepted without examination becomes a silent commander. Hill referred to this as the principle of autosuggestion, but autosuggestion is not merely repetition of words. It is the deliberate occupation of consciousness. It is choosing which ideas are allowed to live rent-free in the mind. Most people practice autosuggestion unconsciously by constantly narrating their lives in terms of limitation, danger, and vulnerability. Then they wonder why fear feels permanent. Psalm 91 operates on the assumption that the listener understands this law, even if unconsciously. Its power is not in recitation, but in internalization. To say, "I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge," is not an appeal. It is a declaration of mental allegiance. Allegiance determines perception. Perception determines reaction. Reaction determines destiny. Hill emphasized repeatedly that the subconscious mind accepts what the conscious mind repeatedly impresses upon it, especially when emotion is involved. Fear persists because it has been emotionally rehearsed for years, sometimes decades. Most individuals do not realize how emotionally attached they are to fear. Fear provides identity. It gives them stories to tell, reasons to hesitate, justifications for failure, and explanations for inaction. To remove fear is to remove these psychological crutches. That is why fearless living feels threatening. It demands the abandonment of familiar narratives. Hill warned that the greatest enemy of success is not lack of opportunity, but attachment to old habits of thought. Faith, when properly understood, is not belief in external rescue. It is confidence in internal law. It is the knowing that disciplined thought produces predictable results over time. Psalm 91 does not promise that nothing challenging will occur. It promises that challenges will not dominate the inner world of the one who dwells correctly. This distinction matters. Many people expect faith to eliminate adversity. When adversity appears, they conclude faith has failed. Hill exposed this fallacy by showing that adversity is often the very condition through which mental strength is forged. Persistence is where fear is finally confronted, because persistence requires consistency in the absence of immediate reward. Fear feeds on delay. It whispers that effort is wasted, that discipline is pointless, that faith is naive. Hill identified this voice as one of the primary saboteurs of achievement. It is not loud, it is subtle, it sounds reasonable, it disguises itself as caution. Psalm 91 counters this voice not by arguing with it, but by ignoring it entirely. It assumes protection regardless of evidence. This assumption is not ignorance, it is strategic dominance of the subconscious. Self-discipline is the daily practice of enforcing this dominance. Discipline is not punishment, it is protection of purpose. Without discipline, desire leaks away. Without discipline, imagination turns hostile. Without discipline, fear regains ground. Hill insisted that the disciplined individual becomes immune to mass hysteria, panic, and emotional contagion. This immunity is not emotional numbness. It is emotional regulation. It is the ability to feel without surrendering control. The mastery of fear requires an understanding of its anatomy. Fear is not singular. It is layered. It includes fear of poverty, fear of criticism, fear of illness, fear of loss, fear of aging, fear of death. These fears intertwine and reinforce one another. Hill taught that these fears originate from conditioning rather than reality. Psalm 91 addresses them collectively by asserting a higher authority that overrides each category. Not by denial, but by reclassification. Danger is acknowledged, but it is stripped of sovereignty. Imagination, once disciplined, becomes the instrument through which fear is replaced. Hill described imagination as both synthetic and creative. Synthetic imagination rearranges existing ideas. Creative imagination receives insights that feel instinctive, intuitive, or inspired. Fear thrives in synthetic imagination when it rearranges worst-case scenarios. Faith thrives in creative imagination when it constructs identity aligned with inner authority. Psalm 91 feeds creative imagination by presenting imagery that is expansive, protective, and commanding. The subconscious responds not to logic, but to pictures charged with emotion. Decision is the turning point where fear loses legitimacy. As long as a person remains undecided about who they are internally, fear retains influence. Indecision creates a vacuum, and fear rushes in to fill it. Hill emphasized that successful individuals make decisions quickly and change them slowly. Fearful individuals delay decisions and change them often. Psalm 91 speaks from a place of finality. There is no hesitation in its tone because hesitation weakens belief. Invisible mental forces are not mystical abstractions, they are observable principles. Habit, expectation, belief, and emotional conditioning shape behavior and perception. Hill referred to the mastermind principle, the subconscious, and universal intelligence, but at their core, these concepts describe alignment between thought and action. Psalm 91 assumes alignment. It does not instruct the reader to feel protected someday. It assumes protection now. The subconscious responds to present tense authority. Fearless living requires redefining safety. Most people define safety as absence of threat. This definition guarantees anxiety because threat can never be eliminated. Hill's philosophy, mirrored in Psalm 91, defines safety as inner stability regardless of threat. This redefinition shifts power inward. It removes dependency on external certainty. It creates resilience rather than fragility. The modern world amplifies fear because it profits from attention. Attention is currency. Fear captures attention more effectively than peace. Hill warned against allowing external voices to dominate internal dialogue. Psalm 91 is an antidote to this domination. It replaces external noise with internal declaration. The individual who internalizes this posture becomes psychologically insulated, not detached from reality, but anchored within it. Responsibility is the threshold few cross. To accept responsibility for one's mental state is to relinquish the comfort of blame. It is easier to say fear is justified than to admit it is chosen. Hill was relentless on this point because he understood that empowerment begins where victimhood ends. Psalm 91 does not speak to victims. It speaks to governors of the self. Fearlessness is not reckless. It is deliberate. It is calculated. It is grounded in law rather than impulse. The fearless individual does not deny risk, they deny panic. They do not eliminate uncertainty, they eliminate surrender. This distinction is what separates inner strength from bravado. As fear loosens its grip, a strange quiet emerges. This quiet is often misinterpreted as emptiness. In reality, it is space, space where purpose can crystallize, space where imagination can be directed, space where faith can deepen. Hill taught that clarity follows discipline, not inspiration. Psalm 91 creates clarity by narrowing focus to one authority. The process is uncomfortable because it dismantles identity structures built around fear. Old reactions no longer fit. Old excuses feel hollow. Old habits resist extinction. This resistance is not failure, it is evidence of change. Hill reminded that every habit fights for survival. Fear fights hardest when it is about to lose control. Fearless living is not achieved through a single realization. It is forged through repetition, through daily mental alignment, through consistent refusal to surrender authority. Psalm 91 is not a moment, it is a posture. It is a way of inhabiting the mind. This is why so few sustain it. Sustained fearlessness demands sustained responsibility. It demands vigilance over thought, emotion, and imagination. It demands persistence when fear attempts to renegotiate its role. Hill understood that most people quit mentally long before they quit physically. Psalm 91 addresses the mind first because everything else follows. The individual who persists in this posture begins to notice subtle shifts. Reactions slow. Panic fades. Decisions sharpen. Confidence stabilizes. These shifts are not miracles. They are consequences. Consequences of alignment with mental law. Fear does not disappear. It loses authority. It becomes background noise rather than command. This is mastery. Not suppression, but hierarchy. Fear is demoted. Purpose is promoted. Faith is reinforced. Discipline is normalized. This is the inner work few see and fewer respect, because it produces no immediate spectacle. Yet it is the work upon which all external achievement rests. Hill insisted that success is first achieved in the mind, then organized into reality. Psalm 91 agrees, though it speaks in a different language. As this internal foundation solidifies, the individual becomes less reactive to chaos. External conditions fluctuate, but internal posture remains. This stability is often mistaken for detachment. It is not detachment, it is command. Fearless living is the quiet confidence that comes from knowing that no matter what appears, the mind will not abandon itself. That authority has been claimed and will not be surrendered. That is the true refuge. That is the real protection. And this foundation is only the beginning. As the mind settles into this posture of inner authority, something subtle but decisive begins to happen. Fear no longer announces itself as an emergency. It loses urgency. It loses volume. It becomes a suggestion rather than a siren. This is the point at which most people make a critical mistake. They assume the work is finished. They mistake relief for mastery. Napoleon Hill warned that this moment is often more dangerous than the beginning, because complacency invites the return of old patterns under new disguises. Fear is adaptive. When it can no longer dominate openly, it negotiates quietly. It disguises itself as prudence, as humility, as realism. It whispers that confidence should be moderated, that belief should be tempered, that expectation should be lowered to avoid disappointment. This is not wisdom. This is fear seeking reentry. Psalm 91 does not moderate its language because moderation weakens psychological authority. The mind requires clarity. Ambiguity creates gaps. Fear thrives in gaps. Faith, to remain functional, must deepen rather than soften. Hill emphasized that faith is strengthened through deliberate reinforcement. Left unattended, it decays. This is not moral failure, it is psychological law. The mind returns to its strongest habit under pressure. If fear has been rehearsed longer than faith, it will attempt to reclaim dominance. Fearless living, therefore, demands not just initial alignment, but ongoing reinforcement. Autosuggestion evolves at this stage. It moves from conscious repetition to embodied assumption. The individual no longer recites declarations to convince themselves, they speak from conviction already installed. This shift is crucial. Words spoken from doubt carry no force. Words spoken from assumption shape reality. Hill taught that the subconscious responds most powerfully to statements made with emotional certainty. Psalm 91 is effective only when spoken internally as truth, not as hope. Persistence becomes more demanding here because progress is less visible. Early stages of change produce noticeable relief. Later stages produce subtle refinement. Fearlessness matures into composure. Composure does not feel dramatic. It feels normal. This normalcy can tempt the mind to disengage discipline. Hill warned that success often breeds carelessness, and carelessness reopens doors fear once occupied. Self-discipline at this level is no longer about control. It is about maintenance. Just as physical strength requires continued training, mental authority requires continued practice. The disciplined individual does not wait for fear to appear before reinforcing faith. They preempt it. They condition the mind daily, not reactively. Psalm 91 assumes this maintenance. It is written as a lived reality, not an emergency response. The mastery of fear now reveals a deeper layer, fear of responsibility itself. Many people unconsciously rely on fear because it absolves them of full accountability. If fear is in charge, failure is understandable. If fear is removed, responsibility becomes absolute. Hill recognized that many people sabotage their progress at this stage because they are not prepared to own the consequences of full agency. Imagination, now disciplined, must be directed with precision. At this level, vague images are insufficient. The mind requires specificity. Hill insisted on definiteness of purpose because a definite aim organizes imagination constructively. Without a clear aim, imagination drifts and fear finds space to reassert itself. Psalm 91 is not vague in its assurances. Its certainty is intentional. Certainty stabilizes identity. Decision deepens here. It is no longer about choosing faith over fear in moments of crisis. It is about choosing identity. Who are you when no one is watching? Who governs your inner dialogue when circumstances are neutral? Fearlessness is revealed not in chaos, but in calm. Hill taught that habits are formed in moments of emotional neutrality. This is where fear must be fully dethroned. Invisible mental forces respond differently at this stage. Early alignment produces internal calm. Sustained alignment begins to influence external conditions. Opportunities appear, relationships shift, resistance decreases. This is often misinterpreted as luck. Hill rejected this explanation. He understood that perception sharpens when fear recedes. The mind notices possibilities previously obscured by anxiety. Psalm 91 speaks of paths cleared, of harm not approaching. Psychologically, this reflects heightened awareness. Fear narrows perception. Faith expands it. The fearless individual sees options others miss. They anticipate rather than react. This is not mysticism. It is cognitive clarity. However, clarity introduces temptation, the temptation to relax vigilance. The mind begins to feel safe. Safety, if misunderstood, becomes vulnerability. Hill emphasized that complacency is the silent killer of achievement. Fear returns not as panic, but as distraction. It dilutes focus. It invites procrastination. It encourages emotional indulgence. The disciplined individual recognizes this shift and responds immediately. Persistence now requires patience rather than effort. The effort was required to break old patterns. Patience is required to sustain new ones. Hill taught that impatience is fear in disguise. It is fear that effort will not be rewarded, fear that time is being wasted. Psalm 91 counters impatience through assurance. Assurance calms the urge to rush. It stabilizes the nervous system. Self-discipline becomes quieter. It is no longer enforced through willpower alone, but supported by identity. The individual no longer asks whether they should maintain mental alignment. It is simply what they do. Fearless living becomes natural, not forced. This is the transition from practice to embodiment. At this stage, fear attempts its most subtle tactic, spiritualizing surrender. It suggests that vigilance is ego, that confidence is arrogance, that authority should be relinquished to external forces. Hill warned against this misinterpretation. True humility is alignment with law, not abdication of responsibility. Psalm 91 does not encourage passivity. It encourages dwelling. Dwelling is active. It is continuous occupancy. The individual who persists through this phase experiences a deepening of trust, not in circumstance, but in process. They trust that disciplined thought produces predictable results over time. This trust reduces emotional volatility. Emotional stability is often mistaken for lack of passion. In reality, it is controlled intensity. Hill admired individuals who could sustain focus without emotional exhaustion. Fearless living now reveals its true nature. It is not absence of fear, but presence of order. Order in emotion, order in decision, order in imagination. This order creates resilience. When disruption occurs, the system absorbs it without collapse. External chaos tests internal order. Hill noted that every advance attracts opposition. Opposition is not evidence of misalignment, it is often evidence of progress. Psalm 91 does not promise a life without conflict. It promises that conflict will not dismantle the inner structure. At this level, the individual begins to influence others without effort. Composure is contagious. Fearlessness alters group dynamics. Hill's concept of the mastermind reflects this influence. The emotionally stable individual becomes a stabilizing force. This is not dominance, it is presence. Fearlessness also exposes unresolved areas. As major fears are subordinated, subtle anxieties emerge. These are not setbacks, they are opportunities for refinement. Hill encouraged continual self-examination. The disciplined mind audits itself regularly. Psalm 91's language supports this vigilance by reinforcing identity repeatedly. The temptation to regress always exists. Old habits wait patiently. They require less energy than new ones. This is why repetition remains essential. The mind is efficient. It chooses the path of least resistance. Fearlessness must become that path. As this internal order stabilizes, purpose sharpens. The individual feels less scattered. Desire becomes focused. Burning desire, once chaotic, becomes directed. Hill described this as the moment when effort aligns with meaning. Work feels lighter, not because it is easier, but because it is coherent. Fear loses its emotional leverage. It may appear, but it no longer destabilizes. It is acknowledged and dismissed. This dismissal is not arrogance, it is hierarchy. Fear has been demoted. The mind, now governed, becomes a reliable instrument. It no longer sabotages itself. It no longer undermines decisions with doubt. This reliability is the true protection Psalm 91 implies. A governed mind is difficult to harm. This stage is not an ending. It is a threshold. Beyond it lies application. Fearlessness must now be tested in action, not contemplation. Hill insisted that thought without action decays. Psalm 91 assumes movement. Dwelling does not mean hiding. It means operating from stability. What follows is the translation of inner authority into outer conduct. And this is where fearless living either becomes permanent or collapses under the weight of real-world demand. When inner authority is no longer theoretical but embodied, life begins to apply pressure in more complex ways. This is not coincidence, it is calibration. Napoleon Hill observed that as an individual strengthens mentally, the nature of their challenges evolves. Early tests target emotional control. Later tests target consistency under responsibility. Fear at this stage does not arrive as panic, it arrives as burden, the burden of choice, the burden of influence, the burden of consequence. Most people unconsciously retreat when life demands more from them. They interpret increased responsibility as danger. This is fear wearing the mask of caution. Psalm 91 anticipates this moment by anchoring identity in dwelling rather than outcome. Protection is not promised from effort, it is promised through alignment. Alignment allows effort without collapse. Action now becomes the proving ground. Hill insisted that belief unexpressed through action deteriorates. Action reveals whether fearlessness is internalized or performative. The disciplined individual acts without waiting for emotional certainty. Emotional certainty follows action, not the reverse. Fear waits for permission. Action denies it. At this level, self-discipline must govern time. Time mismanagement is fear disguised as business. Distraction is surrender. Hill warned that many people lose their edge not through failure, but through diffusion of focus. Psalm 91 speaks of paths guarded and dwellings secured. Psychologically, this is focus protected from fragmentation. Fear attempts to sabotage through overwhelm. Responsibilities accumulate. Decisions multiply. The mind is tempted to retreat into avoidance. Avoidance feels safe. It is not. It is the slow erosion of authority. The fearless individual responds by simplifying. They prioritize according to purpose. Hill emphasized that definiteness of purpose filters obligation. Not everything deserves attention. Imagination, now tasked with application, must remain disciplined. The mind imagines outcomes not as fantasies, but as trajectories. This is strategic imagination. Hill distinguished this from wishful thinking. Strategic imagination anticipates obstacles without dramatizing them. It prepares responses without rehearsing fear. Psalm 91's imagery remains calm even when acknowledging danger. Calm is functional. Decision-making accelerates here. Indecision becomes costly. Hill taught that hesitation at higher levels produces compounding consequences. Fear encourages delay under the guise of thoroughness. The disciplined individual knows when enough information has been gathered. They decide and adjust rather than delay and doubt. Invisible mental forces now operate visibly. Patterns emerge. Opportunities align. Resistance concentrates. Hill described this as the universe testing commitment. This language is symbolic, but the principle is psychological. Consistent action reorganizes environment. People respond differently. Systems shift. The fearless individual does not become reckless, they become responsive. Fearlessness is now tested socially. Others project their fears onto the disciplined individual. Doubt, criticism, and skepticism intensify. Hill identified fear of criticism as one of the most paralyzing forces. Psalm 91 neutralizes this by relocating validation internally. When authority is internal, external opinion loses power. At this stage, loneliness may appear, not social isolation, but psychological distance. The disciplined individual thinks differently, reacts differently, prioritizes differently. This difference can feel isolating. Fear whispers that belonging requires conformity. Hill rejected this lie. Progress requires divergence. Psalm 91 speaks of separation not as punishment, but as protection. Persistence now requires resilience rather than force. Setbacks occur, delays happen, results fluctuate. Fear interprets these as failure. The disciplined mind interprets them as feedback. Hill emphasized that temporary defeat is not permanent failure unless accepted as such. Fear accepts defeat prematurely. Faith waits. Self-discipline governs recovery. The speed with which one returns to alignment after disruption determines mastery. Everyone is disrupted. Few recover quickly. Psalm 91 implies rapid restoration. Harm does not linger near the dwelling. Psychologically, this means emotional disturbances are processed, not stored. Fear also attempts to resurface through success. Success introduces comfort. Comfort dulls vigilance. Hill warned that success often destroys more people than failure because it invites relaxation of discipline. Psalm 91 counters this by framing protection as dwelling, not arrival. There is no finish line where vigilance is no longer required. Imagination at this level must guard against entitlement. Entitlement breeds resentment when challenged. Resentment feeds fear. The disciplined individual maintains gratitude without dependency. Gratitude stabilizes emotion. It prevents fear from reframing challenges as injustice. Decision now extends to boundaries. Fearless living requires saying no. Overcommitment is fear of disapproval. Hill taught that self-respect is foundational. Psalm 91's protection implies boundaries. Not everything is allowed to enter the mental dwelling. Invisible forces respond to clarity. Clarity attracts cooperation. Confusion attracts resistance. This is not mystical. People sense certainty. Systems respond to consistency. Fearlessness becomes operational rather than inspirational. The disciplined individual now experiences a shift in identity. They no longer ask whether they are fearless. They ask whether they are aligned. Fearlessness is a byproduct, not a goal. Hill emphasized focusing on process rather than emotion. Emotion follows alignment. At this stage, fear attempts its most aggressive counterattack: fatigue. Mental fatigue lowers defenses. Discipline weakens when energy is depleted. The disciplined individual respects rest as strategy, not indulgence. Psalm 91 speaks of rest not as escape, but as renewal. Rest preserves authority. Persistence requires pacing. Burnout is fear disguised as urgency. Urgency undermines judgment. Hill taught that steady pressure outperforms frantic effort. Fearless living is sustainable, not explosive. External challenges now feel heavier because they carry more weight. Decisions impact others. Influence expands. Fear warns of potential harm. The disciplined mind acknowledges risk without retreating. Responsibility is accepted consciously. Hill viewed responsibility as evidence of readiness. Fearlessness now reveals its ethical dimension. Authority without discipline becomes tyranny. Discipline without conscience becomes rigidity. Hill emphasized balanced development. Psalm 91's protection is not selfish. It stabilizes the individual so they can operate constructively. The mind, now seasoned, recognizes fear quickly. It does not argue, it acts. Action is the final authority. Thought organizes action. Action reinforces belief. This loop sustains fearlessness. Challenges continue, but their emotional impact diminishes. The individual feels pressure without panic, urgency without desperation, commitment without obsession. This balance is rare, it is earned. As this stage matures, the individual becomes increasingly difficult to destabilize. Not invincible, but resilient. Not detached, but grounded. Fear has lost its leverage. This is the posture from which destiny is shaped intentionally rather than reactively. Hill insisted that only those who master themselves can shape their circumstances. Psalm 91 echoes this truth through its unwavering tone. What remains now is the final test: total ownership. Ownership not just of success, but of life itself. And this is where fearless living demands its highest price. Ownership is the moment fear makes its last stand. Not because it is strong, but because there is nowhere left to hide. When a person accepts total ownership of their life, their mind, their direction, and their results, fear loses its greatest refuge: blame. Napoleon Hill understood that blame is the psychological shelter that keeps fear alive. As long as outcomes can be attributed to circumstance, chance, or other people, fear retains relevance. When ownership becomes absolute, fear becomes unnecessary. This stage is not dramatic, it is sobering. The individual realizes that no external force is coming to rescue them from indecision, distraction, or lack of discipline. Psalm 91, when read without illusion, is uncompromising here. Protection is not promised to those who wait. It is assumed by those who dwell. Dwelling is continuous occupancy of responsibility. At this level, the mind must reconcile freedom with obligation. Freedom without obligation dissolves into chaos. Obligation without freedom hardens into resentment. Hill taught that true freedom is the ability to govern oneself. Psalm 91 describes a person who moves through danger without being governed by it. This is not immunity. It is sovereignty. Fear attempts to reassert itself by magnifying consequence. The mind begins to calculate what could be lost. Fear thrives on attachment. The disciplined individual acknowledges attachment, but refuses paralysis. Hill emphasized that attachment to outcome undermines decisiveness. Outcome is uncontrollable. Process is not. Psalm 91 anchors identity in process, not result. Faith at this stage matures into trust. Not naive trust, but informed trust. Trust in law. Trust in discipline. Trust in alignment. The individual no longer needs constant reassurance. They have evidence. Evidence built through repetition. Hill insisted that faith grows through experience, not theory. Autosuggestion becomes almost invisible now. The inner dialogue is no longer loud, it is assumed. The mind defaults to authority rather than doubt. Fear finds no surface to attach to. This does not make the individual reckless. It makes them precise. Persistence now takes the form of endurance. Endurance is quieter than effort. It is the ability to continue without emotional spikes. Hill admired endurance because it reflects stability. Psalm 91's promise of enduring protection mirrors this principle. Endurance outlasts volatility. Self-discipline evolves into self-respect. The individual does not need external enforcement. They honor their commitments because breaking them would fracture identity. Fearlessness is now protected by integrity. Integrity removes internal conflict. Internal conflict is fear's entry point. Fear mastery reaches completion not through conquest but irrelevance. Fear may appear, but it no longer influences decision. It becomes data, not directive. This is the final demotion. Hill described this as mental poise. The mind remains centered regardless of stimulus. Imagination now operates in alignment with purpose. Fantasies of escape dissolve. Vision replaces daydreaming. The individual imagines impact, contribution, and legacy. Fear shrinks in the presence of meaning. Hill taught that a compelling purpose absorbs fear. Psalm 91 speaks from the voice of purpose, not survival. Decision becomes instinctive. The individual does not deliberate endlessly. They act, observe, adjust. Fear of making the wrong decision fades because identity is no longer tied to perfection. Hill emphasized learning over outcome. Fear is attached to ego. Purpose dissolves ego. Invisible mental forces now respond predictably. The individual notices that resistance appears when alignment wavers and eases when discipline returns. This feedback loop reinforces responsibility. There is no mystery left. There is only law. Fearless living now demands expression. The individual must embody what they have mastered, not through preaching, but through presence. Hill believed that influence is earned through example. Psalm 91's authority is quiet. It does not persuade, it states. The final temptation appears here: retreat. Retreat into comfort, retreat into silence, retreat into safety. Fear reframes retreat as peace. It is not peace, it is abdication. The disciplined individual recognizes this and chooses engagement. Engagement does not mean constant struggle. It means active participation in one's destiny. Hill insisted that life rewards those who meet it halfway. Psalm 91 assumes movement. Dwelling does not mean hiding. It means operating from security. Now the demand becomes clear. Fearless living is not a state you visit. It is a life you choose, daily, repeatedly. Without negotiation, there is no moment where responsibility ends. There is no stage where discipline is optional. This is the cost, and it is absolute. You must decide whether you will remain someone who seeks protection or become someone who embodies it. Whether you will continue negotiating with fear or finally revoke its authority. Whether you will treat your mind as a battlefield or a command center. No more waiting, no more rehearsing fear, no more outsourcing responsibility to fate, circumstance, or belief without discipline. You know the law now. You understand the price. The only question left is whether you will pay it. Because from this moment forward, every thought you allow, every image you rehearse, every decision you delay or execute will either reinforce fear or extinguish it. There is no neutral ground. There never was. Stand in the position of inner authority. Govern your imagination. Discipline your thoughts. Decide without hesitation. Persist without excuse. Accept full responsibility for the condition of your mind and the direction of your life. Do not ask for protection. Become the one who does not surrender the mind. Dwell there, stay there, live there. And let every step you take from this moment on be the proof that fear no longer rules you. You rule yourself. When ownership has been accepted and fear has been stripped of its excuses, a deeper confrontation begins, one that most people never reach because it offers no emotional reward, no immediate relief, and no applause. This is the confrontation with consistency. Napoleon Hill understood that the mind does not collapse because of ignorance, but because of inconsistency. People know what strengthens them. They know what weakens them. Yet they alternate between the two, and in that alternation, fear quietly rebuilds its influence. Fear does not need dominance to survive. It needs fluctuation. Every time discipline is practiced and then abandoned, fear learns patience. Every time clarity is reached and then neglected, fear learns timing. Hill warned that the most dangerous enemy of success is not active opposition, but intermittent effort. Intermittent effort confuses the subconscious. It installs instability as habit. Psalm 91 does not tolerate intermittence. Dwelling implies permanence. Permanence terrifies fear because fear cannot coexist with stable identity. At this stage, the individual must confront the temptation to relax vigilance under the belief that mastery has been achieved. This belief is subtle and seductive. It presents itself as confidence, but it is actually fatigue seeking relief. Mental fatigue is not the absence of strength. It is the accumulation of unprocessed pressure. Fear exploits fatigue by offering shortcuts. Shortcuts promise ease but deliver erosion. Hill emphasized that shortcuts always exact hidden costs. Consistency is not intensity repeated. It is alignment maintained. Intensity spikes and fades. Alignment endures. The disciplined individual no longer relies on emotional surges to sustain behavior. They rely on structure. Structure protects energy. Fear thrives in unstructured time because unstructured time invites ungoverned thought. Psalm 91's sense of enclosure is psychological. It encloses the mind within order. At this level, fear attempts to return through rationalization. Rationalization is fear dressed in logic. It argues that strict discipline is unnecessary now, that flexibility is maturity, that vigilance is excessive. Hill identified rationalization as the intellectualization of fear. It sounds intelligent. It feels reasonable. It is destructive. The disciplined individual recognizes that discipline is not rigidity, it is reliability. The mind now requires refinement rather than reinforcement. Early stages required replacing fear-based beliefs. This stage requires removing subtle distortions. Distortions are not overt doubts. They are slight misalignments, small allowances, minor compromises. Hill warned that compromise with principle is the beginning of decline. Psalm 91's tone allows no compromise because compromise dilutes authority. Faith at this level is no longer emotional. It is operational. It is reflected in behavior, not words. The individual trusts the process because they have lived it. This trust stabilizes effort. Fear cannot destabilize what is grounded in experience. Experience is the enemy of illusion. Autosuggestion becomes environmental. The individual curates inputs, conversations, information, routines, and environments are chosen deliberately. Fear often enters through association. Hill emphasized the power of environment in shaping thought. Psalm 91's imagery of dwelling suggests selective habitation. Not everything is allowed near the inner space. Persistence now looks uneventful. There are no dramatic victories. There is repetition. Day after day, thought after thought, decision after decision. Fear attempts to frame this repetition as stagnation. It whispers that nothing is happening. This is false. Everything is happening. Identity is being stabilized. Hill taught that the greatest transformations occur quietly. Self-discipline must now guard against emotional indulgence. Emotional indulgence is fear-seeking comfort. Comfort weakens edge. The disciplined individual allows emotion without surrendering direction. They feel deeply but act deliberately. Psalm 91 does not suppress emotion. It governs it. Fear mastery at this stage includes mastery over pride. Pride is fear inverted. It seeks validation. It resists correction. It interprets challenge as insult. Hill warned that pride blinds judgment. Fear often re-enters through wounded pride. The disciplined individual remains teachable. Teachability preserves alignment. Imagination must be protected from nostalgia. Nostalgia romanticizes earlier stages. It tempts the mind to return to comfort zones. Fear hides in familiarity. Hill emphasized forward focus. Purpose must remain future-oriented. Psalm 91 speaks of ongoing movement, not retreat. Decision-making now integrates wisdom. Wisdom is not caution. It is discernment. Discernment separates signal from noise. Fear amplifies noise. Wisdom filters it. The disciplined individual listens selectively. Not every opinion deserves consideration. Invisible mental forces respond strongly at this stage because alignment is consistent. Results compound. Momentum builds. This can create a sense of inevitability. Inevitability can breed carelessness if misunderstood. Hill cautioned that momentum must be guided. Unguided momentum collapses. Fearlessness now reveals its social cost. Others may feel unsettled by stability. They may attempt to provoke reaction. Reaction feeds fear. The disciplined individual responds with neutrality. Neutrality is power. It denies fear emotional leverage. The mind now recognizes that peace is not passive. It is active regulation. Peace requires maintenance. Hill rejected the idea that peace is granted. It is cultivated. Psalm 91's protection is active. It is sustained through dwelling. At this stage, the individual may confront existential questions. Purpose deepens. Fear attempts to exploit uncertainty about meaning. Hill taught that meaning emerges through service aligned with purpose. Self-absorption breeds fear. Contribution dissolves it. Consistency now extends to values. Values guide behavior under pressure. Fear compromises values for relief. The disciplined individual holds values steady. Stability of values stabilizes identity. Fatigue may still arise. The disciplined individual addresses fatigue through structure, not surrender. Rest is intentional. Recovery is planned. Fear encourages escapism. Discipline encourages restoration. Fearlessness now feels ordinary. This ordinariness is dangerous if misunderstood. It can invite neglect. Hill warned that familiarity breeds negligence. The disciplined individual respects ordinariness as evidence of mastery, not permission to disengage. The mind, now well governed, requires challenge to remain sharp. Complacency dulls edge. Fear returns when stagnation sets in. The disciplined individual seeks growth deliberately. Growth sustains vigilance. Psalm 91's promise of protection is not static, it is dynamic. It moves with the individual. As responsibility expands, so must discipline. As influence grows, so must self-regulation. Fear now attempts to leverage time. It whispers that effort has been long, that rest should be permanent. Hill identified this as the temptation of premature withdrawal. Many fail here, not because they cannot continue, but because they underestimate the cost of stopping. The disciplined individual understands that stopping does not preserve progress. It reverses it. Momentum decays. Habits atrophy. Fear waits. Consistency becomes identity. Identity simplifies decision. Decision reduces effort. Effortlessness emerges not because tasks are easy, but because resistance has been removed. Fear thrives on resistance. At this stage, the individual no longer seeks reassurance. They seek alignment. Reassurance is external. Alignment is internal. Hill emphasized internal validation as the foundation of independence. The mind now operates with quiet authority. It does not rush. It does not hesitate. It acts. This action reinforces belief. Belief sustains action. Fear has no opening. Yet this stage is not the end. It is preparation. Preparation for the final demand commitment that cannot be revoked when conditions change. commitment that does not depend on mood, reward, or recognition. Fearless living now demands permanence, not permanence of circumstance, but permanence of decision. The decision to govern the mind, the decision to accept responsibility, the decision to persist. What remains is the moment where everything is tested under pressure that offers no escape, no justification, no delay. And this moment approaches inevitably because life always demands proof. That proof is not declared, it is lived. And the mind must be ready. There comes a point where preparation ends and declaration begins, not spoken aloud, but enforced through action so consistent it leaves no room for retreat. This is the moment life does not announce, the moment that arrives quietly and asks a single question without words: who are you when there is no safety net, no applause, no reassurance, and no one left to blame? Napoleon Hill understood that this moment is unavoidable. It is the moment when belief either hardens into character or dissolves into theory. Psalm 91 does not comfort the individual here. It confronts them. It strips away sentiment and demands embodiment. Fear makes its final attempt here not as anxiety, not as doubt, but as nostalgia. It invites you to remember who you used to be, how you used to think, how easy it was to surrender responsibility and call it humility, to retreat and call it wisdom, to hesitate and call it caution. Nostalgia is fear's last refuge because it offers familiarity as comfort. But familiarity is the birthplace of limitation. Growth has no memory. It only moves forward. At this level, the mind no longer needs new knowledge. It needs unwavering enforcement. You already know the law. You already understand that the mind becomes what it repeatedly holds. You already know that fear survives through permission, not power. You already know that discipline is not restriction, but freedom organized. What remains is not understanding. What remains is commitment without escape. Hill warned that the greatest tragedy is not failure, but regret, the quiet realization that one knew better and chose comfort instead. Psalm 91 stands as a line drawn in consciousness. To dwell is to choose permanently, not to try, not to hope, to choose. And choice, once made, demands proof. This is where fearlessness becomes visible. Not in words, not in declarations, not in moments of inspiration, but in what you do repeatedly when no one is watching and nothing is guaranteed. The mind will attempt to negotiate. It will suggest moderation. It will suggest exceptions. It will suggest delay. These suggestions are not neutral. They are fear asking for survival. You must understand this clearly. Fear does not need to win. It only needs you to hesitate. It only needs you to postpone action one more day, discipline one more hour, decision one more moment. Delay is fear's currency. Action is its executioner. The individual who truly dwells in inner authority does not wait for certainty, because certainty is the reward of action, not its prerequisite. Hill emphasized that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward regardless of it. Psalm 91 echoes this by assuming motion. Dwelling is active. It is lived in the midst of uncertainty, not outside it. Now the responsibility becomes absolute. You no longer have the luxury of partial commitment. Partial commitment produces partial results, and partial results invite doubt. Doubt is fear disguised as reason. You must decide whether you will govern your mind completely or continue negotiating with forces that have never had your best interest at heart. This is not about motivation. Motivation fades. This is about identity. Who you decide to be from this moment forward determines what you allow to live in your mind. You either accept total responsibility for your thoughts, your reactions, your discipline, and your persistence, or you surrender that responsibility and accept whatever fear decides to deliver. There is no middle ground. There never was. The law does not respond to intention. It responds to alignment. Alignment means your thoughts, emotions, decisions, and actions move in the same direction without contradiction. Fear thrives on contradiction. It feeds on internal conflict. When conflict ends, fear starves. You must now choose to end the conflict. Choose to end the habit of rehearsing disaster. Choose to end the habit of waiting for permission. Choose to end the habit of explaining your hesitation. Choose to end the habit of negotiating discipline. Choose to end the habit of surrendering authority in moments of pressure. This choice will not feel dramatic. It will feel heavy. Responsibility always does. But that weight is not oppression. It is gravity. And gravity is what keeps you grounded when chaos erupts. You are not here to be protected from life. You are here to be anchored within it. Psalm 91 does not promise escape. It promises stability. Stability is earned. Stability is maintained. Stability is enforced. From this moment forward, every thought you allow is a vote for the life you will live. Every reaction you choose is a declaration of who governs your inner world. Every time you act despite fear, you weaken it. Every time you hesitate because of fear, you strengthen it. This is the final truth. Hill dedicated his life to revealing destiny is not a mystery. It is a pattern, and patterns are built through repetition. Fearless living is not achieved once. It is enforced daily. So now the demand is clear, and it is non-negotiable. Assume full command of your mind. Discipline your imagination until it serves purpose, not panic. Decide without waiting for emotional permission. Persist without needing external validation. Accept responsibility without reservation. Stop asking whether you are protected and start living as one who refuses to abandon the inner post. Dwell there, not when it is convenient, not when it feels safe, always. Let fear speak if it must, but do not obey it. Let doubt appear if it tries, but do not entertain it. Let uncertainty exist, but do not surrender to it. Stand where authority resides. Think from that place. Act from that place. Live from that place. And make this decision so final, so embodied, so relentlessly enforced that fear no longer recognizes you as a negotiator, only as someone who has claimed absolute responsibility for their life and will not give it back. This is not inspiration. This is instruction. And the moment to act on it is not tomorrow. It is now.